Having arrived, I'm going to call to order the Higher Education Finance and Policy Committee. Representative Davids, do you have a motion for us?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I'd move the minutes from Thursday, January 26, 2020.
Representative Davids moves the minutes of the previous meeting. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Motion prevails. The minutes are approved. Members, today we have the presentation from the University of Minnesota. I want to welcome President Gable to the committee. I also want to tell the members that if you have questions, we'll take them as we proceed. So if you have something that you want to ask, please do so. With that, welcome to the committee, and please identify yourself for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. My name is Joan Gable, and I'm honored to serve as the president of the University of Minnesota. I'm joined by my colleague, Julie Tonneson, and we will be presenting on behalf of the university today. Vice Chair, members of the committee, Committee Administrator Worth, and committee staff, it's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and we're very much looking forward to sharing some information with you and answering your questions. So since becoming president of the university, and some of you may be surprised, I'm in my 4th year already because the middle 2 years were COVID and somehow those sort of didn't count, or they counted 5 times as much, I'm not really sure. But in either case, I have very much appreciated the opportunity to engage with all of you and your colleagues in St. Paul, visit and learn about the communities that you serve, how your work together serves the state of Minnesota, and then to explore how the university is your partner in all this and the role that we have played in benefiting the state, benefiting our students, benefiting the entire mission that I know we share in public service. So the University of Minnesota is a world-class institution. We're very proud of that, but we're also very proud that we're grounded in our sense of place, in our core mission, in our connection to the dirt on which we stand, and our entire system-wide strategic plan emphasizes this balance between what it means to serve the state of Minnesota, but to do so at world-class levels. That plan was developed with all of you. As you know, we've really tried to come up with strategic goals and then targets and measures, transparency and accountability that reflects the constituencies that you serve, that reflects our strengths, that reflects our opportunities, that reflects our challenges. The strategic plan, MPACT 2025, also reflects our priorities and our needs, and it guides the choices that we make so that we are able to set our budget framework according to that strategy, make our budget requests to you according to that strategy, especially as we all work together to keep Minnesota's only land-grant research institution affordable and accessible for all students who may wish to study with us. So at the core of the strategic plan is the intersection of our values and the call to action, and at that intersection we call these efforts commitments. Our cornerstone commitment is to our students, and you see success under that commitment, such as this past fall enrolling the largest class of Minnesota high school graduates as freshmen, the second largest cohort in the Twin Cities in half a century. The record was last year. We actually intentionally scaled back a little bit from last year to this year, but had a 6% increase in applications. So very strong demand amongst Minnesotans for what happens at the University of Minnesota. We also set a record for an increase in our graduation rate. So the students that arrive are being served well, they're graduating on time, and they're graduating with debt that is below the national average and trending down. In fact, as you'll see in one of your handouts, this Points of Pride card that we developed for you, over 40% of our students are graduating with no debt at all. We're very committed to discovery, innovation, and impact. That's our second commitment in the strategic plan. And under that commitment, we've now crossed over the $1 billion mark in research funding, and we're able to sustain that 2 years in a row and are on track to do that again this year. We care about that because that is resource mostly from the federal government that comes in from the outside. It would not flow into the state of Minnesota but for the research that the University of Minnesota is doing. And that funding creates not only research into discoveries and cures, it creates jobs, it creates investment in infrastructure, and it means something in the everyday lives of Minnesotans in ways that we may not always be able to see and touch. For example, this year we had a record number of startups, 22 separate and distinct functioning startups emerge from that research. And we had a record number of patents, 241 patents come out of that research. That puts us in the top 1% in the country for patent production and innovation, all of which ultimately yields more startups and more jobs and more economic impact. We were elevated into the top 25 public research universities this year for the first time in over a decade. I will say, in fairness, rankings are getting some attention right now. Some of the members of this committee may be paying attention to that. We are too, but in the sense that the ranking for the institution as a whole measures a lot of the things that we really care about, the way in which we're caring for students, the amount of debt students take on, the work that the faculty are doing. For those measures to result in an increase in our rankings, we want to make sure that you're aware of that. We are very proud of that part. And we were able to participate directly with the city and the state to become the host venue for the 2026 Special Olympics, which is really exciting. As many of you know, I had the honor of escorting the Minnesota delegation of Special Olympics athletes through the opening ceremonies at the 2022 Games in Orlando. It was an incredible honor. It was one of the most joyous, happy, amazing things that I've been able to do. And I'm so incredibly excited for what that means for us when it comes here, how it will allow us to show the rest of the country and arguably the world what we do here in Minnesota, and for all of our venues, many of which you have been key to us being able to offer, how wonderful they are and how that allows us to serve the community and our students. We also are very committed to being an equitable institution. We welcomed our most diverse class ever to the University of Minnesota this year. We have been ranked by multiple different rankings as one of America's best employers for diversity. And we've continued with a really deep focus, our partnership with Minnesota's tribal nations, including our historic engagement with the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council and the creation of the Native American Promise Program. This is also reflected in student responses to surveys that we do. We survey our students every year on their sense of belonging, and in particular, our undergrads on the Twin Cities campus as our largest undergrad group. Their response to this is, up 10 percentage points since last year, with over 90% of students describing a strong sense of belonging. We watch that really closely because that's one of those sort of subjective measures of whether students are happy. And these are students, many of whom went through COVID, felt very disconnected, and so for us to be able to welcome them back and have it mean something and measure in this particular survey is, I think, very notable and important for the overall student experience. And we're very committed to our fiscal soundness and being good stewards of the resources. We know every dollar of tuition, every dollar of state allocation, every dollar of federal funding, every dollar of philanthropy could go someplace else, that every one of those dollars is a choice. And so we're very committed to stewarding those resources well. So for example, we've launched the PEAK initiative, where we are continually working to bring down our administrative overhead. We're about 18 months into the PEAK initiative, and we're down almost a full percent from 11.6 to 10.8 of total cost in administration. That might not sound like much, but on a $4.2 billion annualized budget, it's a really big change, and it's trending in the right direction. We take it very seriously, and we're working really hard at it. We think that, well, to the extent that administrative backroom can be the best is yet to come, we do think that's going to continue to get better, and you'll start to see really good results there. And finally, our strategic plan is very committed to the state of Minnesota. We call this part of the plan Minter sections, where we focus on the core strengths and challenges of our state and the core strengths and opportunities with the expertise we have at the university, and a focus there in health and sustainability and food and ag. We do a lot of other things too, but those are the opportunities that we've elevated across the entire system. And as you know, those are areas of great strength for us, great opportunity for partnership. And if we do our job really well in those spaces, the work that we do impacts every single person in this state: students, faculty, staff, citizens, partners, et cetera. So we have been able to be a really focused partner in that space and are eager to continue to do that work. And in the healthcare space, of course, you've heard a lot about our next generation healthcare innovation vision, and I would be happy to talk about that in more detail if you'd like during the Q&A. But I will share with you that we have over 7,000 students enrolled right now in one of our more than 60 health sciences degrees. They treat over 1 million patients per year. 70% of Minnesota's health professionals are trained at the University of Minnesota, and our graduates go on to serve in the state of Minnesota. And the care that we need to provide in every corner of the state, we consider a core part of our mission. And the research that we do into treatments and cures and into the best forms of healthcare delivery, we also continue.
President Gable, I think we have a member who has a question. Representative McDonald.
Yes, please.
Oh, Mr. Chair, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt your presentation, but See, I'm told that the U of M in-students are paying 40% higher than that of Wisconsin in-state students and 60% higher than Wisconsin or Iowa in-state students. So we're a little bit out of line and out of whack with our neighboring states. How do we compete with that? And can you substantiate that? And what can we do to be more competitive with our neighboring states for our own in-state tuition?
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative, excuse me. So our top line full freight in-state tuition is higher than our neighboring states. Our net price that the average Minnesotan pays is virtually identical to our neighboring states. And that's because each state funds the work towards what students pay differently. So we have the state grant program. Some of our neighboring states don't have that. We have very robust philanthropy. We recently closed a philanthropic campaign at $4.4 billion, and the cornerstone of that campaign was student scholarships. And we have other forms of support for students that we generate through our own resource management, like the Promise program. So our net price is the same and in some cases lower. Also, the debt that our students take on is lower because we target that support to the students who need it most. So the students who have the highest socioeconomic challenge receive the most support, and our graduation rates are higher than our neighboring states. And so the investment that our students make when they come to the University of Minnesota yields in a shorter course to degree, which of course is the best way to leverage the investment that you make in your education. So I think that it's still, I don't mean to dismiss the fact that if our top line price is higher, it creates a challenging optic. But I would encourage all of us to focus on what students actually pay, the debt they actually incur, and the service and support they actually receive. And I would say we are very competitive. And that's why 7 out of 10 Minnesotans are in our entering class are choosing to stay home.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you. Yeah, just one follow-up. Thank you for that clarification and some good numbers, definitely. What would you say then to the idea that the more state money you get from each legislature, the higher the tuition has gone up? I've seen some graphs over the years that the more money that we allocate to the U, the tuition goes up as well. Well, in theory, it should be going down. Is that a true statement?
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, I haven't seen those graphs. I've seen the opposite, whereas the overall percentage of the budget of the university's funding, the state contribution to that budget has declined. We have seen some increase in tuition. And there was a period about 10 years ago when tuition went up dramatically while state funding went down dramatically during the recession, 2008, 2009. In the last 4 years since I've been here, we had 1 year with no tuition increase at all. Our average tuition increase over the last 5 years has been 1.6%. So for all intents and purposes, tuition increases have been flat for the last 5 years. We've worked really hard to make sure we didn't hit a wall in making the opportunity to study at the University of Minnesota inaccessible, and have focused all of our philanthropic efforts and a lot of our internal resource management around scholarship support as well. So, but I have a forthcoming chart that would show it going in an indirect relationship as the funding goes down. That's when the tuition goes up.
President Gable.
Thank you. So on the whole, we're very proud of the strategic plan. We're very grateful to all of you for how you helped us create it. We think it has been a great architecture for us to think about how we serve the state, how we make sure that we're a university of choice, and I'm very delighted to share these results with you. So if you want to flip to your second slide, I'll talk about our budget request. So the University of Minnesota is requesting $205 million to our base appropriations for the next biennium. So we first request a $45 million incremental increase in each of the next 2 years for our core mission activities. So this covers what you see in the strategic plan and our operations, things like compensation, so that we can stay competitive with our talented faculty and staff, operational support for our facilities, student support services. So this request constitutes $135 million of the $205 million for the biennium. Second, we request $30 million recurring appropriation beginning in fiscal year '24 for a new Minnesota resident scholarship to incentivize and recruit Minnesota students to attend college and graduate from any of our campuses, and that would total $60 million for the biennium. And then last, we request $5 million beginning in fiscal year '24 and continuing thereafter for public safety investment including different infrastructure investment. I can go into more detail on that if you would like, totaling $10 million. And I'm happy to explain each of those.
President Gable, we've got a question. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam President, for being here. Curious what we've got the 24-25 ask. What did you ask for and what did you receive in 2022-23, if you have that number? I know that.
President
Just
Gable.
for comparison purposes, it's helpful for committee members to know that kind of information.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, I'll defer to my colleague who I know has instant recall on such things.
Welcome to the committee, and please identify yourself for the record.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Julie Tonneson. I'm the budget director for the University of Minnesota. And one would hope I have instant recall, but there are literally 5 years going on at the same time in my head. So I will tell you that we received a recurring increase in appropriation of $18 million starting in FY22, so the first year of the biennium, with no increase in the second year. In terms of what we requested, that one is slipping my mind. It was, I think, well, I don't want to guess. I can get you that information.
I don't know if I got your name correct. It's Tonneson?
Tonneson.
Tonneson,
It's a
okay.
Norwegian.
Okay. I just
Name.
wanted to make sure we had it clear for the
Yes.
thing. Representative Scott?
Thank you. And I did have one question on the public safety piece. And Representative O'Neill, who couldn't be here today, she and I have taken a special interest in that. We've been contacted by students and parents about that. And that was before I even served on higher ed, which is my first gig this year. But so you're asking for $5 million the first year and $5 million the second year for a total of 10. Can you break down what you would be spending the $5 million on this year, and then what you'd be spending the $5 million on in 2025 or 24 and 25?
President Gable or Ms. Tonneson? President Gable?
Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, so we don't have it line itemized. The items that we expect to spend the funds on are in the increase in officers. We have 8 in the queue who are about to start. We have cameras, security equipment, card access control for buildings, and then the ongoing maintenance for the infrastructure that all of these require, the IT systems, the people who run the technology. A lot of the challenges that we have on campus or in the surrounding neighborhoods, we need patrols in order to address, but some of it we also, by simply locking doors in more secure ways or having better lighting, better call systems, can do a lot of deterrence and maintenance that way. We also have increased overtime shifts, security personnel. We'd like one more K-9 unit. And we have one I believe we have one right now and need another one. And then we have some vehicles that we need to replace that would improve our ability to do rolling patrol on campus and in the surrounding neighborhoods. So I don't have the exact cost for each item, would be happy to provide that as a supplement.
That would be great. Thank you.
President Gable, with this core mission and the other amounts, are you going to tell us what the tuition increases would be then as a result? If you got this budget, what tuition increases would happen?
So we, Julie gets nervous when I get that question, Mr. Chair, but we have, the way we do our tuition planning is we have levers for how much each % of tuition increase would change the budget. So if we were to receive our full ask in order to meet what we think are the necessary raises for students, faculty, and staff, and meet the needs of the infrastructure costs, utilities, things like that, that we don't control, things like library subscriptions, beakers in the labs, we would expect to raise tuition at 3.5% like we did last year.
President, 3.5% each year or 3.5% over the biennium?
3.5% each year.
So, okay, thank you. Representative Cleaborn.
Thank you. So that begs the question for me. You know, I'm a really strong supporter of the University of Minnesota and the mission that you have. Why are then you coming with such a low request? Or if you're going, I think if we have a state obligation of 66%, right? Why are we transferring that to the students? That would be my question to you.
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative Cleahorn, the 3.5% is a last mile thing. Every time we increase tuition, it is the last choice. But we are trying to balance a variety of things at the same time. And It is a lower tuition increase than most of our peers are making in the neighboring states or across the country. In this environment, we are sitting right in the middle of the peer group with which we compete in terms of tuition, and we are concurrently increasing the philanthropic support and scholarship support for the students who need it most. So the net price for the students who need it most shouldn't change much, and it allows us to distribute the different revenue sources that we receive accordingly. All things being equal, if we didn't have to increase tuition, we would be delighted not to, and we have had years in recent memory, sometimes when we were quite stretched where we didn't, but it becomes unsustainable unless we were to receive everything that we ask for, and we plan accordingly.
Representative Kleber.
Thank you. And the reason I say that is this, right? I would always prefer the institution to come to this body with what you really need. And I said this to your predecessor as well. So, and then let us determine the assets that we have that we can allow. But give us the information to say a 1% increase in tuition would be this amount of money. When we don't have that information before us, we can't make good decisions. So I would always prefer you to ask for the need, the full need, and let the people of Minnesota know what that full need is, instead of deciding for us what we can and can't afford to do. So I would just leave it at that. So if you would please provide for us that additional information as to what it would cost us to cover this increase, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative, we would be delighted, and I'll absolutely share that feedback with the Board of Regents.
Thank you.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, President Gable. Hearing that discussion about the tuition, I just wondered, so if the average tuition increase is projected currently with this request to be 3.5%, but yet you're holding harmless the students in greatest need through scholarship and philanthropy, would then students who are not meeting the threshold for these scholarships be paying above the 3.5%?
No.
No, okay.
President
Sorry,
Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative, no. They would not. The tuition price goes up across the board, but our philanthropic support, scholarship support, Promise program, grants, Pell Grants, et cetera, simply bring the price down more for those with the higher, who come to the university with higher financial need.
President Gable, your request is significantly lower than the Min-State system request. So in a perfect world, if each of you got what you requested us to give you, would the U feel slighted that they didn't get as much as the Min-State system?
Mr. Chair, we would be delighted if you funded our request, and that's the entirety of our emotional reaction if you were.
Thank you. I appreciate that, President Gable. Proceed.
Thank you. All right, so I'll go into a little more detail about the budget on the parts that we haven't already covered. So just to give a lay of the land on what our budget currently is and where it goes. So our current annual budget is $4.2 billion, and it's made up of a variety, oh, and apologies, this is the next slide, slide 3. Made up of a variety of restricted and unrestricted revenues, some of which we've discussed. So there are restricted funds. Those must be spent at the discretion of the funding source. So federal grants for research, state research grants, restricted endowment earnings, restricted appropriations, and that comes to about $1.4 billion, or approximately 1/3 of our budget. A second category of funds are our auxiliary revenues at about $350 million, or about 9% of the total budget. This is housing, dining, the bookstores, parking. Those dollars are dedicated to covering the cost of the associated activities, and the rates generating these revenues are not set at levels to really generate overall support for the university. They support the function that charges the fees. The third and fourth categories are the unrestricted categories. So first, roughly $745 million per year, or 18% of our budget, is generated in the departments from sales, fees, royalties, the clinical care income that our clinicians provide, and the related activities in support of that. These funds are used to cover their operating costs and make sure that those services are provided at the appropriate level. And then, of course, finally, is our state O&M appropriation and tuition, which we combine. That makes up 40% of the university's annual budget. This is a total estimated $1.7 billion this year, and obviously this is the core mission component of the budget. On the next slide, you'll see that state appropriations, so this is slide 4, are used for operations, and they remain a significant and important source for the university. But as state, excuse me, by the way, that's not contagious. It's asthma, so I can see everybody doing this. It is, I assure you, not contagious. But as state support has declined over time and costs and inflation have gone up, sort of apropos of our earlier discussion, we've relied more on tuition to continue to fund university operations and make sure that we maintain the quality of the mission in the way that we're absolutely committed to. So if you were to look back a generation and a half, 30 years ago in 1990, of the state appropriation plus tuition, that was 70% of our budget, and tuition was 30% of our budget. At the same time, the state appropriation was 39% of our total revenue, and the general fund portion alone was close to 7% of the state's total general fund spending. So in the intervening years, and this is a national conversation, there have been economic downturns, shifts in needs, priorities at the state level, and we know you have difficult decisions to make. The general fund appropriation to the university has dropped from 7% of total state spending to 2.5%. And commensurate with this change, the other two metrics have shifted in the way that you might expect. So the state appropriation tuition ratio has shifted from 70-30 to 40-60. And the state appropriation has dropped from 39% of university revenues to 17%. So on the next slide, we plot the dollar values. These are not adjusted for inflation, by the way, for our recurring state appropriations and tuition over that same time frame, apropos to our earlier discussion. And on this graph, you'll see that our reliance on tuition has continued to increase as the state appropriation has fallen for a number of years before slowly going back to the pre-recession levels. So to make up for the decline in state support, but also to make sure that we continue to maintain quality and innovation and student support, graduation rates, research, et cetera, 3 key things have happened. So over 30 years, tuition has gone up from 12% of total university revenues to 25% if you look at where we are today. We've also become much more dependent on that other revenue category, which is now 49%, was 49% of our total revenue and is now 58%. And lastly, we've implemented a lot of internal budget cuts and have done our own reallocation exercises to use our own resources to invest in our strategic plan, in our goals, and the services we provide. So each year, every unit goes through an exercise to free up resources to cover higher priority needs. Everything from my office to our biggest colleges, every campus, we do this exercise every year. That's why you've seen our internal overhead go from 11.6 in fiscal year 20 to 10.8 in the last fiscal year, and it's continuing to trend down. And we've made a lot of investment in getting the right support and ideas and creativity around how to get that down even further so that our resources can totally focus on core mission.
President Gable, we've got a question. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering, you speak of the cuts that you've made or the reductions, and I'm wondering if you could give us an idea of some of the things that you've done, if you have that itemized anywhere or off the top of your head.
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative Scott, I do not have it off the top of my head. The total amount of resource reallocation, my colleague could tell you what it averages per year, both in percentage and dollars, and then we can get you more detail. But if I may defer, Mr. Chair, to
Ms. Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative. It varies by year, but setting aside FY22 in the pandemic, it averages around $20 million a year of internal reallocation, existing resources. What it tends to be about 70% position related, so positions are not filled, most often through attrition, or they hire someone at a lower expense, or they restructure in some way to save salary dollars. The other 30% would come with a whole host and wide variety over the years of reductions in supplies and equipment and what have you. It just depends on the specific actions being taken at the unit level. It's literally hundreds and hundreds of decisions every year to stop spending money on something in order to free up dollars.
you.
Representative Scott. I'm sorry, finished?
I'm good, yes,
Okay,
thank you.
sorry. Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam President, welcome. And some of the discussions here, I think you mentioned that the funds that we're looking at right now, it's not inflation adjusted. Is there another slide that will help us understand if we can do the inflation adjusted? Two, the asterisk that I see about include cigarette tax and MinCare or Minnesota Care, what does that entail?
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative Noor, we do not have the inflation-adjusted slide. We could certainly prepare it for you. The next one is,
The appropriation.
apologies, the next slide is for the appropriation and inflation-adjusted slide, but the version of the slide that you see for trends in tuition, we do not have the inflation-adjusted slide. And then on the asterisks, I'll defer.
Ms. Tonneson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Noor, the asterisk refers to two appropriations that are used for operations from those funds. We get $22,250,000 per year from the cigarette tax that goes to the health science focused schools. And then we get $2,157,000 per year in our base from the Healthcare Access Fund. Again, that goes to the medical school. And those are excluded from this, included on this chart. Sometimes we exclude them when we are focusing on just general fund appropriations.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think for clarity, this is the Healthcare Access Fund, not the Minnesota Care Fund.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I misspoke. It is the Healthcare Access Fund for the $2,157,000.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You did not misspoke. I think the slide shows Minnesota Care, so I was wondering where does
yes.
Minnesota Care come from?
Ms. Tonneson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Noor, thank you for that correction. You are absolutely right. It is the Healthcare Access Fund rather than MinCare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Noor. Representative Colt.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as this slide is concerned, as the son of a math teacher, I have to confess I'm having a little trouble with the y-axis. If we look at the state investment number, what was the 2003 number? Because I read that as just over 600 million, and then the 2023 number seems to be below that, but that's at 713.8 million.
Ms. Tonneson.
Mr. Chair, Representatives, I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me. I can tell you I have FY08 memorized, and that is $708 million. And so FY03 would be just over, probably closer to 630 million, but I can get you the exact number.
Okay, maybe it would just be helpful, I think, to get the exact numbers in a spreadsheet, because to be honest, I'm just having a hard time reading this particular graph, so.
Sure.
Ms. Tonneson.
Yeah.
Would be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members.
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Chair. That was my question as well. I was trying to draw lines over, and I was being very unsuccessful, so.
All right, proceed.
Thank you. So let's go to that next slide, if you will. This slide illustrates the funding we've received from the state and shows some of the challenges we've had in keeping up with inflation. So the pre-recession high point in terms of appropriations to the university, as Ms. Tonneson was saying, was in 2008 with the appropriation of $709 million. In the intervening years, the appropriation has been reduced significantly and then started a slow progression back up. So 15 years later, in fiscal year 23, the appropriation in actual dollars is back to where we were in 2008, give or take, at $714 million. However, over that same period of time, inflation has impacted the buying power of those dollars. If you adjusted the 2008 appropriation for inflation, that $709 million today would be $960 million, as compared to our actual appropriation of $714 million. So that's a gap, or a loss of buying power, of $246 million. And even if you discount the last 2 years with higher inflation and look back to the years of more moderate inflation, the adjusted value of our appropriation still remain more than $140 million below that of the 2008 appropriation for many years of the cycle that you see represented in the chart. So this has created a challenge for us in balancing our budget and making the investments that we need to make and finding the resources that we need. And it has forced us to rely more on continuous spending cuts, and in some cases, even when we don't want to, some increased tuition revenue. On the next slide, slide 7, we addressed some of the core mission support. So in light of the financial pressures that all of us are under, I'd like to go into a little bit more detail of how the state might help the University of Minnesota meet our mission and enhance the lives of Minnesotans in our request for your support for our biennial budget request. So the request for a $45 million incremental increase in each of the next 2 years will help cover half of the projected $90 million inflationary cost of our core mission activities. So core mission activities are student services, student support, instruction, launching new programs like our nursing collaboration with Minnesota State that I know you've heard about, the Next Gen programs, which I could describe to you in more detail. It's that research and making sure that the research is happening and that we remain competitive for those federal funds that we compete for each year, research that very much benefits the entire state. And then, of course, it's making sure we have safe, well-maintained space for our students, faculty, and staff, and the many thousands of people who visit our campuses every year. So inflation is real. We deal with it just like every individual person does, every institution does. Labor, food, building supplies, utilities are the same for us as they are for anybody else. We will cover the remaining $45 million in the incremental increase needed through our internal spending cuts that Ms. Tonneson described. We're hoping for some revenue growth in some of the areas that I described for you earlier. And we have in our budget some increased tuition revenue through enrollment growth or through the modest percentage increase that I described earlier as well. On the next slide, I want to go into a little more detail on core mission support with some of the things that have happened since the last time we were before you. So we reached agreements with the Teamsters and all 3 AFSCME units on campus, clerical, healthcare, and technical in 2022. And we have an agreement with our law enforcement labor services, which is our UMPD, which represents our UMPD, which will go before the Board of Regents for approval on February 9th. We don't anticipate any challenges with the approval of that collective bargaining agreement. So these agreements represent about 3,400 greatly appreciated members of the university community who perform jobs that we could not do without, from plowing the snow, cleaning our buildings, our dining services, patient care, student data and technology, our veterinary hospital support, and of course our police officers. And the key outcomes from these agreements, I mean, they're obviously very hundreds of pages long, but the highlight is a 3.8% wage increase and a minimum of $20 per hour. We really want to retain our talented employees. It is incredibly competitive. I know you're hearing about this from everybody who comes before you, but we also have tuition, wage increases, and we have to pay for them. So to maintain our facilities is also another area where we're seeing increased costs. Utility costs are expected to increase 8 to 9% for the next year, driven solely by the price of electricity and natural gas. And state support will also help us manage other operating cost pressures. We have real cost increase in some of the technical things that we do, like the supplies we need in labs are amazingly expensive. Lab reagents, supplies, beakers. In some cases, these things are doubling. They're under the same supply chain pressure that a lot of raw materials and other things are under pressure from. Subscription costs are up tremendously on the academic side, and all of our library facilities, which are, of course, a cornerstone to students' educational experience, research, what our faculty do, the databases that we provide to support their teaching and research. And some of the other things that we've been investing in that we've been talking about for many years now, but student mental health is a very important area of investment for us and their overall wellness and support. What we do to foster that sense of well-being, when you see a 10% increase in the student response on that survey, that's because we've made investments in human capital programs, technology that supports students, career development and planning, academic advising. When you see the graduation rate going up, that's where that's coming from. Tutoring options to make sure our students have strong opportunity for academic success, and then the overall student safety, including emergency and crisis intervention.
Cable, we've got a question. Representative Colt.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, the compensation increases, does that, so it says here that is to retain faculty and staff. does that include administration as well? Or is that a separate
President Gable.
line item, for lack of a better term?
Mr. Chair, Representative, when we do our salary increases, they're across the board. So it's everyone, faculty, staff, student employees, everyone across the board gets that is the starting point for our salary increases.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Colt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it'd be helpful for me to sort of, if we could break down that sort of component of it in terms of faculty, staff, administration, et cetera, in kind of, I guess, as many ways as you can sort of conceivably do that. I think it'd be helpful to know kind of what the individual sort of costs or line items are for that particular component, if that's possible. Thank you.
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, so these programs and the people who support those programs are why we're seeing these incredible outcomes for our students, graduation rates, the support that they're receiving academically. They get financial counseling. That's why debt is going down, et cetera. And we need to pay the people who do that work well, or we will lose them. And so we have budgeted for the compensation rates that are described.
President Gable. Representative Cleveland.
Thank you. I just want to bring just kind of to the committee's attention a trend that I think many people are not aware of. There are professors at the University of Minnesota who are being offered positions with zero wages, and their compensation comes through the grants in their research. I don't need you to answer it's really just a statement that when we talk about wages and things like that, there are people who don't receive compensation through what we would normally consider compensation.
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, that's absolutely true. We have employees whose salaries are paid by the federal grant that their research is in support of. We have people whose salaries are paid by the auxiliary revenue if they work in that unit. We have employees who are paid through the foundation, which is the philanthropic arm of the university. There are a variety of different, in the same way that we have a variety of different sources of revenue to cover the operations of the institution, we have a variety of different sources of revenue that cover the underlying compensation of the employees.
Thank you.
President Gable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you go to slide 9, the purpose of this slide is to just give you some insight into enrollment. And I know our colleagues at Minnesota State spent a lot of time on this as well. This is the sort of thing that Chancellor Malhotra and I, well, we may actually have a cocktail when we share this information with each other. I don't want to speak for him. But it's an interesting trend, and we're dealing with some challenges in this space, much of which you all are very familiar with. Overall, across the University of Minnesota system, we have a 6% decrease in enrollment. This means we're bringing in, across the system, $60 million less in tuition annually. And there are a lot of different reasons why enrollment is declining. I know my colleagues at Minnesota State have discussed this with you at length. We have the exact same headwinds and pressures. It's a very competitive landscape for students. There are fewer of them. You've heard us call this the demographic cliff, the national term there in terms of the number of high school graduates. And we have colleagues, as we talked about earlier, in surrounding states and across the country who are coming into major metros, particularly in the Twin Cities or along borders, and offering packages that are very competitive. The University of Minnesota system, we have capacity on every single one of our campuses to enroll more students, and we want to, not only because we think that that's part of our mission, but because we think that that's how we serve the state, and that's how we all get the best from the investment that we make in higher education in this state. So on the next slide, you'll hear about something that we think is an interesting way to
President
address.
Gable, you've also, at my request, provided another breakdown of the enrollment. And members, it's in your packet. It's the same way the Min-State system did it by campus, and it's over a 10-year span. So if you would take a look at that, and you would also have then the overall numbers. But I think the more interesting numbers are the breakdown by campus over the last 10 years, particularly a couple of the campuses, and then the Twin Cities campus. So my question would be, looking at the other chart, if you got your full request, how would these numbers change? You've got a 10-year systemic decline, so we give you your request, what would the next fiscal year look like, or with enrollment?
Mr. Chair, it's hard to say, to be perfectly honest, how much can change in 1 year. But I can tell you that we have been in a multi-month internal review of how we can reverse the trend on the campuses that are seeing this trend. Some of the trend is tied to the external factors that I know Minnesota State went into great detail, so I won't repeat them unless you would like for me to, around simply the number of students graduating from high school these days. But some of the trends around enrollment are tied to the quality of service that is provided to students once they arrive on campus that encourages them to what we call progress to degree and goes into retention. So it's the head count of students coming in as freshmen or transfers, but it's also the head count of students who stay and progress and graduate, which of course is what everybody wants. And so we think that there is headroom, if you will, on each of our campuses to streamline path to degree, to streamline the support for students as they pursue those degrees, mental health, academic, career planning, so that they come in and graduate as quickly as possible. As you know, Mr. Chair, we've been working really closely with other programs that compress the time to degree, things like PSEO, College in the Classroom, Ramp Up to Readiness, and our recent launch of the Next Gen programs. Next Gen Med, for example, is a full 4-year degree in 2.5 years in partnership with the Mayo Clinic and on a proprietary Google platform. All of these together over time should help with those unsettling numbers, but in 1 year, it's hard to say how quickly they would move.
President Gable, I agree. I don't think we're going to turn this around in 1 year, but I'm looking at Morris. How do you explain the discrepancy here with Morris being so much larger than Duluth or Crookston as far as the declining enrollment? What would be your explanation for it?
Well, Mr. Chair, I think some of you know I attended an undergraduate institution a lot like Morris. I went to a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, and nationally, liberal arts education is under probably the fiercest headwind of all of the different headwinds that higher education is experiencing. And on top of that, they sit right on the border with competition that is fierce. And that's a tough combination. I would also argue, well, not argue, I would suggest that that the nature of liberal arts education, these things are cyclical. When I was an undergraduate, and this was obviously quite some time ago, liberal arts education was busting at the seams. Everybody viewed it as the best launching pad to the highest earning jobs, you know, professional school or doctorates, and the competition, and at the same time, Morris's enrollment was at a historical high. Across the board, we're seeing, I think, a loss of appreciation for what liberal arts colleges offer our students. We have a lot of really compelling data and a lot of really compelling individual testimonials as to why that's really not true. The earning potential from a liberal arts degree is not the same immediately out of college, but levels off within 5 years. There's Department of Labor statistics to show that. And a lot of the opportunities that come with a liberal arts degree in terms of if you want to go into the professions that require graduate school, doctors, lawyers, PhDs, et cetera, really important fields that our state needs, that the liberal arts degree is an excellent foundation. But I think, and since you asked for my personal opinion, I'll share it, that a lot of this is storytelling and really educating potential students about what is or isn't available on a campus like that. And I think we have some work to do there. The demand was so high for so long that I think we got out of the habit. I think the same is true for net price that we talked about earlier, that we need to do a better job communicating the actual cost, and it's because it's a much better story than what people perceive for it to be. And we have been working on new communications plans, connecting with high school counselors, et cetera, but we have work to do.
President Gable, I agree that it's secular, but we're looking at a 10-year pattern here.
Mm-hmm.
And the pattern goes back well before your time as president of the University of Minnesota. So what discussion has there been in your office with your administration, specifically how to turn this around?
We have part of the PEAK program that I talked about earlier. PEAK well, everything gets an acronym, right? But in this case, PEAK stands for Position for Excellence in Knowledge. So this is, at its core, our program to reduce our administrative overhead. But in the process of doing this work, particularly for Duluth, Crookston, and Morris, which have a real potential to do some sharing in their backroom functions in order to keep their overhead as low as possible so that they can reinvest, we started looking at very specific support for those 3 campuses with an emphasis on Morris for the exact reasons that you describe in the programs that they offer, in path to degree, and making sure that's clear and direct, in thinking about potential new programs that they could offer that reflect the current demands that students have or the current needs that the state of Minnesota presents, and then setting timelines and expectations for some of this to improve. There also is some, and my colleagues, particularly my liberal arts colleagues, don't like me to refer to it this way, but there is some market adjustment that probably needs to happen. The historic highs of liberal arts education and liberal arts colleges may simply need to be adjusted to reflect where current demand are, or current demand is, and have the budgets adjust accordingly. But we want to make sure we hit that sweet spot. We don't want to contract in a way that harms the potential for students to have access to this form of education. We want it to contract where it should be to meet the needs of students, to offer these programs, to have this very vibrant campus with this really important mission. It's the only public liberal arts college in the state of Minnesota. So it may be that we don't go back to historical highs, but we definitely would expect enrollment to improve.
So President Gable, in your budget, if you get your request, you'd still have a 3.5% increase in tuition each year. So you're still arguing that increasing tuition isn't going to impact these numbers?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The system, what we call the system campuses, Morris, Crookston, and Duluth, do not have a 3.5% increase in tuition. Their increase is likely to be below 1% this year, and that's how we've been doing this over the past several years. They've either been at, that's the Twin Cities and Rochester tuition increase is 3.5%. And also the resident scholarship that we have in our budget proposal is intended to do even more focused work around that net price for Minnesota residents to be encouraged to stay home and in particular attend these campuses.
Okay. President Gable, then I would appreciate a breakdown of tuition by campus in your budget request, because that is a totally different answer than the initial answer of 3.5. And when we're looking at these numbers, I'm talking about all systems, not just yours, but looking at these, I don't think tuition increases are the way out of this, but that would just be my observation.
No, Mr. Chair, we agree, and I apologize for not being clearer when I answered your question earlier. We have been separating the Twin Cities and Rochester tuition increases from the other 3 campuses increases since I've been here, except for the year that it was 0, when no one experienced a tuition increase, in order to reflect the competitive landscape of the campuses against which those chancellors primarily compete.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam President, I think there's more discussion that needs to be made on this topic. And also wanted to look into the marketing and also trying to partner with high schools across the state. I wanted to know more about the PSEO. You know, it's a critical component of bringing students into the system. University of Minnesota does not take a lot of students through PSEO, and the threshold for students to qualify is so high. What are we doing to do more integrated system so that we can attract more students locally to increase the enrollment across the all the campuses?
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative Noor, actually, we're huge fans of PSEO, and I went through something like PSEO when I was in high school. It was obviously nowhere near as sophisticated as what we're able to do today, since it was longer ago than I care to admit. But I believe this is, at the risk of sounding glib, the fairy dust on getting high school students through college in an efficient, cost-effective way, is to start really thinking about all of the ways that you start earning credit as early as possible at the lowest cost possible. So my colleague, Bob McMaster, is here, who can talk about more specific numbers, or we can get you a breakdown of how we're doing it. But there is no resistance internally to PSEO students. Now, the marketing of it and the perception of it and the idea that it's harder or that there are other barriers or friction, I think gets back to this reinvestment. We're making a whole new investment in our communication and outreach to try to get at some of these optics that we think are limiting students' choices where they shouldn't be placing limitations, and we would accept full responsibility for that.
Representative Noor.
Mr. Chair, Madam President, I think there's more than 1,500 applicants who apply for PSCO through the University of Minnesota. And I think there's a little bit of 300 students who are admitted through that process, if I may be correct. 600 students who are admitted. So the numbers could be higher because I think there's so many students who are interested in joining the University of Minnesota through PSCO. But because of the way the system is set up, it's actually pushing students out because I've had several conversations with students who are really up to the number that is required. I think it's almost, you have to have a GPA of 4.0. And I don't know how many students, if we're trying to attract students across the board, more diverse student body and everything else, we got to do more in that area. And I think with innovation, with technology and so many other things, the students don't have to be coming to the campus. They can be taking online. We've seen during the pandemic things have changed, including that system. I think we have to be more nimble and to be able to adjust to the needs that exist right now. And I think those are things the U is lacking at this point, from my perspective, and I think from the conversations I've had with many folks.
Representative Cleburne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and President Gable. So I have always considered Morris to be a gem. I'm a strong supporter of liberal arts in its ability to teach people how to think, not what to think, but how to think. And it's really critical as we look for the growth of our state. And when I think about the chair's comment about this is a trend over 10 years, the push for STEM and STEM alone has been tremendous for the last 2 decades, right? And I think we do need to really talk about the importance of the arts and how they round an individual. But to Representative Noor's concern about PSCO, I'm wondering, given the location of Morris and the distance between some of the high schools that are near and dear to that campus for filling the seats, if the university would even consider a residential PSCO program. If there's 44% excess capacity, that might be something new that we could explore and look to getting those students in there early. We don't want to lose the talent, and we want to be able to support the families. So it's just a thought that I would like to bring to your attention. Thank you, Mr.
President
Chair.
Gable. No. Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again for being here. So Rochester. So have questions about Rochester. So it's been made very clear to me from my community how valuable we view the Rochester campus. I personally view it as a value, but it's also been very clear from very loudly from our community how important the Rochester campus is to DMC, to Mayo, to our downtown community, and to our overall workforce. And I was looking at the chart that you provided by campus, and I had not seen the little star previously about how many folks are on campus that are technically being counted in the Twin Cities program. So I just want to clarify. So are you saying that the overall number of Rochester is actually not 617, it's actually 951? If we count the folks that are being counted in Twin Cities but are actually in Rochester getting their education.
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative, note that the 900 are in Rochester, but they're pursuing a degree that's either accredited or completed in the Twin Cities, so they count in Twin Cities numbers, but they're physically in Rochester.
So,
Representative Hicks.
oh, thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So there are 951 University of Minnesota students in Rochester pursuing their education.
President Gable.
Yes.
So, thank you, Chair.
Representative Hicks.
So there are 73 less students in Rochester than there are in Morris. I mean, like, just when I think about campus size, I am shocked at those numbers. Because the Rochester campus footprint is tiny. I was not aware that it was that large, kind of comparing apples to apples until, so Chair, I just do want to say thank you for this chart.
Representative Hicks.
This has been really helpful for me.
Representative Hicks, this chart came at my request, as the chart did for Mid-State. My concern is that this is not one of the most significant issues that should be in front of us for higher education. This is a chronic declining enrollment, and it isn't going any other way but down. So I would hope that whatever budget we come up with, we begin a trend the other way. Representative Hicks, you have another question?
No, I just thank you so much for this.
President Gable, who sets the budgets for Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester? Do they set it by campus, or do you set it?
Mr. Chair, the chancellors propose a budget, and then we work with them to finalize the budget, which then becomes a part of we present a system budget that the Board of Regents approves.
So I'm going to have clarification on that. So they propose a budget, and they're supposedly in charge of their campuses. Yet you can overturn that budget or change that budget at your request or whim?
Well, the chancellors report to me, so they function very independently, but it's all funded through, it's one funnel. So we all work together to develop the system budget, much in the way that we work with the deans on the Twin Cities and Duluth campuses, who have a lot of independence in the development of their budget. I suppose there's technically veto power. That's not how it actually happens. There's adjustment at the margins, questions, clarifications, but it is an iterative, collaborative process to develop their components of what becomes the overall system budget.
Have any of the campuses ever proposed a dramatically different budget and it wasn't approved as a result of this declining enrollment? Say, no increase in tuition or a decline in tuition or some other avenue here to offset the declining enrollment?
No, Mr. Chair. Now,
President
they
Gable.
are fans of the much smaller increase relative to the Twin Cities path. They are eager for targeted philanthropic or other scholarship support for potential and future students, which we work very closely on to the extent that the restrictive funds allow. I want to be clear that while tuition is definitely a factor in students' tuition in their decision on where they matriculate, a lot of our data shows that it is not the primary factor. Now, in some families, it certainly is, that they choose simply the place that charges the lowest tuition or where the cost of attendance is the lowest, and that's it. But a lot of students choose where they go to school for a variety of reasons. For example, our biggest competitor in the Twin Cities is St. Thomas, which is obviously significantly more expensive than we are. So the idea of why a student chooses, absolutely tuition is a factor, and we're working to, over time, right size or level the tuition that's charged on those campuses and also level the scholarship support so that more and more students can be attracted. That's the cornerstone of the Minnesota resident scholarship requests that we're making. But we don't want to put them in a position where they can't operationally function or maintain quality.
President Gable, I'm going to request again that we see the tuition increases as a result of your budget by campus. And as soon as you can get that to us, it would be much appreciated.
Absolutely,
Representative
Mr.
McDonald.
Chair.
President Gable, I know from several of families in my district in Wright County, but Delano in particular, because that's where I live and do quite a bit of work with the high school and the students, have chosen other colleges because of the security issues in Minneapolis and particularly the incidences in the University of Minnesota. So I'm sure that it's a priority, top priority for you and many in this room and in our state. Should you not receive the $5 million, I would presume you have in the budget already and some plans already, should you not get that money, to make security a top issue. I'm just one little town in Wright County that several, and I mean handfuls, have chosen to go somewhere else, even St. Thomas, which is not, of course, their security is sketchy as well, but out of state as well. And so what is your plans, should you not get the money, and or what are your plans now to ensure the public safety of our students and faculty and members of the community?
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative, so obviously top priority, safety at the cornerstone of everything that we do. It's hard to even get into some of these other discussions if people don't feel safe or are not safe. So we've had a multi-tiered approach since we've been experiencing this uptick in crime in the surrounding neighborhoods. I should say that on campus, meaning the literal campus, the land that is the universities, crime is very low and has not gone up over these last couple of years. We are experiencing upticks in crime in adjacent neighborhoods, and that is very challenging from a technical jurisdictional point of view. It's challenging to coordinate with different constituencies how best to address. And so we've done a few things that are starting to yield. So we have been working very actively with MPD. We always did. But in addressing the fact that their headcount is significantly diminished right now, sending our officers into adjacent neighborhoods on advanced patrol and not just in response to calls, both for visibility and for deterrence and prevention. We've been working with the cities to increase lighting. We've hired more police officers. We have 8 about to come out now. That's a big increase for us. We are historically in the low to mid 50s in police officers. 8 is a big percentage increase in police officers for us. We've also hired laterally some officers. We have increased the number of security professionals who are not sworn or armed officers, but are out patrolling and visible to help in the adjacent neighborhoods. We've been doing walkabouts. I do ride-alongs. I've done 2 of them with our police officers on night shift to make sure that I have a full understanding and appreciation of what's going on. And then we put together what we call the Strategic Safety Advisory Committee. I really tried to turn it into an acronym because everything has to have an acronym. That one defied me, but that's the Dinkytown Business Association, Marcy Homes Homeowners Association, UMPD, our police force, our city council representatives. We consult with the representatives who serve those districts, one of whom is in the room. And to work on this intersectionality, which has been really challenging because otherwise it starts to seem like this and who's ultimately responsible. And when it was at its peak, we paid Minneapolis police officers triple overtime to patrol the city of Minneapolis. That was a jagged pill to swallow, but we did it in order to ensure safety in the adjacent neighborhoods and surrounding neighborhoods. It's winter, so obviously things are calmer when it's this cold outside, perhaps the one upside to how cold it is outside. But even comparing to past winters, it's better this year than it was last year and the year before. And we're optimistic that that trend will continue, especially since these 8 officers will graduate and join the force in the next few weeks, and that'll help us a lot with patrol. So what would happen if we don't have the $5 million? We'll continue to do all the things we're doing. It just slows down all the extra. I mean, we want to get at this hard. We want to get at this in a really transformational way. We want everyone to feel it. And we also want to do it in a way so that all the individual members of our community, who all have very different, beautifully diverse backgrounds and lived experiences, know that the way in which we're doing it recognizes what they bring to the table and where they have concerns. Safety in every way we would define that word. And we will do it anyway. It'll just take longer. This is an accelerant, and we think a really important one for exactly the reasons that you described.
Representative McDowell.
Wonderful. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure we all appreciate the detail and passion that you shared with in the plans. Last question, though, and as far as the budget goes, I would presume you probably already have money in the budget for some new lights and cameras. You wouldn't need $10 million in 2 years to do that. I would presume that that's already in the plans in your current budget to do that in the next year or 2.
President Gable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, some we've already done.
Okay.
Some we're asking the city of Minneapolis for. Where we can put lights ourselves with our own funds is limited because it's not our spot. So we've been acquiring those lights that are on those little carts that you roll out and you see them go up sometimes around football games or other big events in order to address lighting in the areas where we don't have our own either jurisdiction or resources. But yes, we have already started and we do absolutely plan to continue. It'll just take us longer if we don't have the resources that we've requested.
Representative Noor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, this is a very important conversation. I know many folks would like to talk about my neighborhood, which, without even visiting, I raised my 4 little kids, and I think sometimes perception. perception. I think people are portraying that that place is unsafe and so many other things. Guess what? I'm raising my 4 little kids there. And it's not what people tend to portray it as. Yes, there's some challenges. Yes, like any other place across the state, I'd like you to visit, see how, the University of Minnesota has invested in security, the work that is happening on the ground, so that we can actually see that. And sometimes, I live there. I go through there morning, evening, every day. I'm there. I shop in Dinkytown with my kids. We walk during the summer, just going to go buy some bubble tea or something else. It's a beautiful neighborhood. So I want you to send the message, it's safe. And the work that we need to do, I think I've been fighting for additional funding to increase lighting and to do more work, more collaborative work with the city and the county and all the jurisdictions around the University of Minnesota. We have not been successful. In fact, some of my colleagues on the other side have said no. And I think it's time for us to shift the narrative and see the work that has been done on the ground, and to be able to appreciate the work which is being done by University of Minnesota, so that we can actually do better for all Minnesotans, especially for those students, those young students who are coming from home to live in a different place, so that they can really appreciate. I want you to send that message. I want you to notify everybody how you feel when you show up and being part of the community that I live in. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
President Gable, you want to respond, or Representative McDonald?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be happy to take you up on that offer, but not in the next couple of days. I'll be happy to go down in the warmer weather. But I do feel safe when I'm down there. I do some business down there as well with some photo stores, and the campus is a lovely campus. So I'm just sharing with you some thoughts from residents in my district. But I'd be happy to reassure them that once I have the tour, that we have from you evidence that it is safe indeed.
Representative Knorr, why don't you remind us how much of your district contains either part of the U or?
Mr. Chair, it's the entire Minneapolis campus is in my district. So all the neighborhoods surrounding University of Minnesota is my district. So it's not only the U, but also the neighborhood. So I think there's a need to have more collaborative effort. We used to do that. The University Alliance used to do a lot of work. I think there's a need to expand that so that we can work directly with the neighborhoods and to be able to provide those patrols and other things that is happening at the campus to be able to be available. I know we're doing a lot of intervention through the city, but I think there's a need to also invest from this committee to ensure that the neighborhood surrounding from Prospect Park to City Riverside to Como to all the surrounding areas, Mercy Homes need the same level of engagement to ensure the students, when they move into a different neighborhood. They don't know the neighborhood very well. Sometimes, young students who tend to leave their stuff in the vehicle, crimes of opportunity is high because they need to acclimate themselves. And that, the second district precinct does a good job in collaborating with the University of Minnesota to ensure there is more safety around the university. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Cleburne, did you have a question directly related to this? I have 2 other members otherwise.
Just a statement, really.
All right, Representative Cleburne.
Thank you. In the last session, we had an opportunity, and I just want to, President Gable said it, Representative Knorr said it, I just want to make sure it's heard. We had an opportunity to provide security funding, and we, as a legislative body, House voted yes, Senate voted no. We did not, as a legislature, provide the money for security that was requested. That's all I want to say.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And President Gable, I'm wondering, is part of the equation here the student experience on campus as far as drawing and hopefully increasing enrollment, would you say?
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative, what do you mean?
Well, Mr. Chair and President Gable, the student experience on a college campus is a big deal, and students get a feel when they walk onto a campus at least that was the case with my two kids. They just knew right away. We visited college, they kind of knew. And also, part of that is, what they're hearing outside of being there themselves. And that goes to the question for Representative McDonald to let people know that the place is safe. When there are news stories that say contrary to that, that raise alarms, then that's out of our control. But the student experience, I think, is really an important aspect of any college experience. And I have a bunch of news articles here, that you had to refund dollars for student dining because there was inadequate food. There was fungal growth found in the dorms. Students were bundling up in their dorm rooms due to heat pump failure. We have the issue during COVID of requiring staff and students both to have the COVID shot before being on campus. And I think all of those sorts of things bundled up speak to an overall student experience and what they could expect if they go to the U. And I'll let you respond to that, but also in your response, I'm wondering, do you still have the COVID shot requirement for students and staff before they can be on campus?
President Gable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, the current status on the COVID shot is that it became a part of our overall vaccine requirement, like measles and mumps, and it was added as one of the shots. So the answer to that is yes, unless and until that policy is modified, which we're talking about like many campuses have, but we haven't modified it yet. And I imagine that will hit a board agenda soon. But if I may, Mr. Chair, to get to the broader question. So we were hit really hard in staff shortages around dining. Some of the stories around what happened with dining were, as you might imagine, fundamentally false, that what we were offering our students wasn't what was actually being offered to our students. And we survey our students continuously during this period, and they were not unsatisfied, and they were grateful for the refund, reflecting that staff shortages required some creativity on their part or more additional planning on their part. I will point out that the Twin Cities is the only campus in all of this discussion that is not experiencing a decline in enrollment. The challenges that we've had with infrastructure are real, and they were very distracting and unfortunate, but that's why we ask for HEAPR, is in order to be able to maintain those buildings. I mean, we just had this issue with Northrop and the Root, but there was a 100% HEAPR maintenance issue. The issues addressed with the students were really carefully communicated, and we worked directly with both student government and the student advisors who work within the dorms on how we communicated, how we attended to students. Sometimes buildings fail, and especially in the challenging weather and environment that we work in, things like heat. When I was in South Carolina, I never received one complaint about heat. Funny how that happens. But instead, it was all the other things associated with being with the other side of the weather spectrum. When you have a historic campus and you don't get all of your HEAPR funding, sometimes it's hard to maintain all of those buildings. We think, a really tremendous job. But at the core of what you're asking, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, my kids are the same age. I still have a son who's in college, and he had exactly the same thing, where it was like that vibe, like that feeling when you know that this is the place for you. And that has this intangible quality that we have really tremendous admissions and recruiting professionals led by Bob McMaster, who I know all of you know, who work on that. And we ideally would never have a physical infrastructure issue. We would never have a staff shortage. It would be perfect all the time. We are not perfect all the time. That's why we refunded some of the money in order to make sure that we were managing that well. But we think we do an amazing job on the totality of the student experience. That's certainly what our students report when they fill out these qualitative surveys for us every year. Our applications were up 6% last year. We're trending in the exact same direction this year. So I think while perfection is absolutely the goal, and I don't mean to express in any way that it's acceptable to have anything less, the challenges that we've had are sort of also experienced on other campuses as well. And I think I would stand behind our student experience and how we handle things when things don't go perfectly.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a follow-up question to that would be, I know we're going to be getting to your bonding capital investment request, but so are some of these projects, I'm assuming, are included in your HEPR and other capital investment requests?
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. If you. When we get to that, Mr. Chair, if you would kind of delineate, if you have a breakdown more of, this is going to go for the dorms, this is, to make up, to kind of give us an idea what is in that number.
Thank you.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question I want to go back to, but I would like to reflect on my colleague, Representative Noor's comments, which I do really appreciate. It is a beautiful community. It is a beautiful campus. I've spent so much time there over the years with my kids at sporting events and music competitions, and, I really do appreciate and value the neighborhood. But I also have to say, the lived experiences of some of my constituents in the last 2 years is not that. I had a young woman carjacked at gunpoint who is still suffering the consequences of that. I had another young woman carjacked, not at gunpoint. And I have to say that those experiences are also real. And that has been very challenging for these families. And to your point just now about student experience, that you think it is handled well. I had extensive conversations with some of the regents after those incidents because the students were not supported. They were told this happened technically off campus, and they didn't get their laptops replaced. They couldn't get into the buildings because their ID was lost. When the car was stolen, all their assignments were in the cloud, and they were downgraded in their grades, and it took months to get the system to respond and support these students, even though I was literally on the phone with regents multiple times in the weeks following those incidents. So I completely agree with Representative Noor that the community is vibrant and beautiful, but there are very serious problems with crime that I think are not being adequately addressed, and that certainly has been the experience of my constituents. So I just want to say that I hope that the subsequent experience has led to some more supports for students when they experience such attacks, and that they do get more quick response from the university to make just simple things like getting into buildings and having professors be alerted and things like that. I hope that system has responded now, but certainly, there are serious issues as well. Mr. Chair, if I may, I have a question.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you. Going back early on, there was a lot of great data, honestly, that I hope we can get provided, because I was furiously taking notes and I'm not sure I got it all down. So some of it was the state had provided 70% and now it's 40%. And like those, I'm a numbers person, so having those percentages is super helpful, and I would love to see that in writing. But one of the other percentages was admin fees have switched from 11.6% down to 10.8%. I think I jotted that down correctly. But my understanding is that in 2021, there was a redefinition of what admin costs are. And I just wondered how that has changed, how it's allocated among the mission, the operations, et cetera. And if you could just sort of walk us through so we understand, because my understanding is that was not sort of coordinated with MMB and OHE and how we understand the numbers. So I just want to make sure that we're all seeing admin costs through the same lens. Thank you.
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I'm going to defer to the expert in the room.
Ms. Tonneson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Robbins. A couple of things. Yes, we did change our definition of administration in terms of describing expenditures in the last several years in response to, really, it was time. I will say there is no shared definition of administrative expenditures across higher education or across the state. So there is no accepted and required way of approaching that. So Minnesota State chose a way to define their administrative expenditures. We chose a way over 10 years ago in how to describe ours. And for about a 10-year period, we stayed with the same definition, and we reported it annually to the board, and we report it as part of the 135A statutory requirements to the state. Every 2 years, we report that information. Then about a year and a half ago, with the strategic plan, Impact 2025, we had an opportunity to relook at how we defined administration, and we took another round of consultation internally and a lot of conversations to define it, I think, better. And so we do have a different definition. So how we are describing it today, the 11.6 to the 10.8% over the last 2 years, is on a different definition compared to what it was 5 or 7 years ago. And we would not propose to compare to that time period with this new definition. So it does encompass what many would think of as administration, but we take our total expenditures and divide them into 3 categories: mission, direct mission, which is direct instruction, direct research, et cetera; operations, things like custodial staff, land care, student service type work; and then administration is the third bucket. And we have a lot more information on that, and in terms of the definition and examples that we can share with you. But that was an intentional change in the definition on our part.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that. Very helpful. If you could provide us the definition of what constitutes administrative expenses in the new definition and how you sort of parse that out among the other buckets, if you do, that would be fabulous.
Yes.
Thank you.
Members, there is a Regent Forum tonight from 6 to 7 in G15 of the Capitol, since the regents have been mentioned. You may want to attend that forum to get a view of the regent candidates. We will be having a joint meeting of this committee and the Senate Committee for regent selection. So be informed. Members, we're almost out of time, and I want to particularly thank the president. It's rare that we have both the chancellor and then the president before the committee for the entire time, but we appreciate that greatly. I'm going to have the university come back to finish this, so save your materials, but they cannot come back Thursday. Thursday we have the governor's budget request, and then we'll get the U back. And I understand, Madam President, your schedule. If you can't, I know we'll have Myron Franz 100% by that time after a surgery, so he'll be ready to come back and fill in at that point. So members, if there are any other questions or concerns? Seeing none, then meeting is adjourned.